What would you think about a 25-cent reprint of the portrait of Dorian Gray?
The Portrait of Dorian Gray?
Of the portrait of Dorian Gray.
The Portrait of Dorian Gray?
Of the portrait of Dorian Gray.
The Portrait of Dorian Gray?
Hi, Ed. It's Bob. I'm here in my hotel room tonight on the road, and I'm waiting for that call back from the advertising division for Fletcher Jones Motor Cars about the Mandela Effect with Field of Dreams. I should be hearing back from them shortly. Anyway, I got to tell you, I came across another amazing Mandela Effect that everybody needs to know about. The movie 7-Year Itch, starring Marilyn Monroe, it's a pretty famous movie. I mean, people have been talking about it for years. And in the movie, they clearly call the famous story The Portrait of Dorian Gray properly. As many people who suffer from the Mandela Effect believe, it was always a famous story written by Oscar Wilde, The Portrait of Dorian Gray, not The Picture of Dorian Gray. And in the movie, you can clearly hear it recited as The Portrait of Dorian Gray. And the context in the movie is very interesting because it kind of mirrors the story of Dorian Gray, which basically is a story about a guy who tries to live a life of debauchery and sensual pleasures and all of that. And when he does, the portrait of him that was done by a very, very major artist seems to age and get all decrepit, and he looks terrible in it as he does more and more kind of like self-serving and kind of hedonistic things. What's really amazing is that in the movie 7-Year Itch, it's sort of the same idea. It's about a guy who's kind of getting, feeling his oats while, his family is away, and he's basically falling in love with Marilyn Monroe, the neighbor. And it's a fascinating study because basically it's mirroring some of the same ideas that The Portrait of Dorian Gray, which was a very controversial story back in the late 1800s. I mean, I got to tell you, it's really starting to freak me out because the story of Dorian Gray is about really changing something like a picture through the actions of one person, changing the picture of him, and basically it's like a Mandela Effect. It's fascinating. So let's line this up. The Portrait of Dorian Gray is clearly proven to be the right name for that story, unlike what it is now, The Picture of Dorian Gray, in the movie. And then also, I know, Ed, you came across a script for the movie, which basically talks about it being The Portrait of Dorian Gray.
Oh, but one other thing while you're here. I've been thinking about that fall list, and I came up with a notion. What would you think about a 25-cent reprint of The Portrait of Dorian Gray?
The Portrait of Dorian Gray?
It's a natural, Sherman. Look what we'll be giving them for a quarter. Vice, lust, and corruption. The story of a young man, on the surface, clear-eyed and healthy, just like you, Sherman. But underneath, dry rot and the termites of sin and depravity gnawing at his soul. Well, how's that strike you, Sherman?
I heard a story fairly recently about an event that happened at an art gallery. And somebody went up to the people in the art gallery and said, hey, what do you think of the idea this is really called, the famous story, The Picture of Dorian Gray? And they laughed hysterically. They were like, no. It's The Portrait of Dorian Gray. Now, when you line this thing up, you got to remember, the idea and the story of the Dorian Gray story is about somebody whose actions are a little bizarre, but it changes the picture in real life. Now, let's just go down the rabbit hole of the Mandela Effect theories. Let's say you're playing with either the D-Wave computer or you're playing with the CERN Large Collider in Switzerland, and you want to try to affect reality with quantum physics. Why wouldn't you use or try to affect The Portrait of Dorian Gray story? Because it kind of brings together all the issues that the Mandela Effect is really bringing out, which is, can you change reality by doing something, or can something change reality? And that seems to be what's happening. So just like with Field of Dreams, it seems that we have another proven, and I mean proven, Mandela Effect, where people today who believe it's one thing are shown clearly at one time in history it was something else. It's not The Picture of Dorian Gray. It is The Portrait of Dorian Gray, just like I've always thought. And when I heard this first Mandela Effect being, kind of bantied about, that it was the, allegedly called The Picture of Dorian Gray, I said, what? So I'm so glad finally me and millions of other people, including you, Ed, I know, believe now we have it proven. So let's chalk one up again for proof of the Mandela Effect.